this virtual Zoom would like closed caption, it can be enabled with selecting the live transcript option at the bottom of your screen. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight for our conversation around the role of law and courts in creating trauma-sensitive schools. Before we start, I'd like to thank Amy Rutstein Riley, the Dean of the Graduate School of Education, for supporting our efforts. And I see her on the screen. Also, Sal Tarasi, the Director of Leslie Institute for Trauma Sensitivity, for hosting this very important conversation. If you have questions throughout the talk, please write them in the chat, and Sal will help facilitate the dialogue towards the end. We feel so fortunate to have Michael Gregory from the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative, TLPI, a longtime partner with the Leslie Institute for Trauma Sensitivity. And to introduce our keynote this evening is LIFT's amazing lead clinical faculty, Joe Restuccia. Joe?
Thank you, Patricia. I'm Joe Restuccia, and I want to introduce our speaker this evening. Michael Gregory is clinical professor of law at the Harvard Law School and senior attorney at the Trauma, Learning, and Policy Initiative. Mike teaches Harvard's Education Law Clinic, in which law students represent individual families of traumatized children in the special education system and participate in TLPA's larger systemic advocacy to create trauma-sensitive schools. Mike has also taught courses in education law and policy and education reform movements. Mike has worked with TLPI since its founding in 2004 and is a co-author of TLPI's Report and Policy Agendas, Helping Traumatized Children Learn, Volumes 1 and Volumes 2, and is also a co-author of Educational Rights of Children Affected by Homelessness and/or Domestic Violence, which is a manual for child advocates. Mike has been recognized as a Bellows Scholar by the Association of American Law Schools for his work advocating for safe and supportive schools legislation, and has served on numerous statewide child advisory boards. His recent work on elevating student voice as part of the discussion on education reform is already proving to be invaluable. Mike received his JD from Harvard Law School in 2004 and holds both a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Arts in Education from Brown University. I could go on forever talking about Mike and his accomplishments. Suffice it to say that he is a tireless advocate for students, families, and educators. It is with great pleasure that I introduced my colleague and friend, Mike Gregory. Mike?
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate the introduction, and thank you to Sal and Patricia and Nadej and Merlin for inviting me to join you all this afternoon. I'm going to start by sharing my screen because I do have some slides to share with you today. And sometimes when I do that, it moves things around on my screen. Let me just ask for a thumbs up if you could see that slide. Okay, very good. That's always a good sign when the screen sharing works. I'm also going to start by just asking that if anybody who is joining tonight that is willing to turn your camera on, it sure makes it a more fun experience for me, especially at 5:04 on a Friday afternoon, to just get the energy of being able to see who we're in conversation with. So thank you for those of you that are turning on, and no pressure. If it's a Friday afternoon and you just don't want to look at yourself on a Zoom screen anymore, feel free to leave your camera off. But I appreciate those of you that are turning it on. Let's get started. I have an outline for the ideas that I'll talk about and hopefully get to hear from you about this evening. Although Joe did a pretty good job of this already, I'm going to spend just a couple more minutes providing a brief introduction to what the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative is, who we are and the work that we do. Then I'll give just a brief overview of how we think at TLPI about the concept of trauma-sensitive schools. Then we'll spend most of the time talking about two federal court cases that have been brought in recent years in which advocates have sought to use litigation to create trauma-sensitive learning environments for students. And we'll spend most of our time really thinking about this as a strategy for system change, whether we think litigation is an effective way of bringing about more trauma-sensitive schools. Then I'll talk a little bit about an alternative strategy for system change, a strategy that TLPI is using that, at least so far, does not involve litigation. And then I'll try to leave a nice amount of time at the end for your questions and also just to engage in discussion. I'd also like to point out that in addition to Joe, who's the director of training for TLPI, in addition to being the lead clinical faculty for LIFTS, I'm also joined by two other colleagues from TLPI who I see on the screen tonight, Marisa Del Rosario and Ann Eisner. And especially when we get to the question and discussion portion, I'm really going to lean on my colleagues to jump in and share their thinking, as well as, anything I might share. And so some learning goals for our time together this evening. I think it would be great if during our time together tonight, you're able to consider the importance of school culture in fostering trauma sensitivity in schools, evaluate the role of courts in creating trauma-sensitive schools, and also situate your own work as educators in relation to broader system change advocacy. So with those goals in mind, let me just say a little bit more to orient you to TLPI and the work that we do. So we're a partnership between Massachusetts Advocates for Children, which is a nonprofit in Boston that recently celebrated its 50th anniversary and was instrumental in the passage of many groundbreaking laws in education reform, including the first state special education laws in the country, the first bilingual education laws in the country, and many others. So we're a partnership between MAC and Harvard Law School. And our mission is to ensure that all children, including those impacted by traumatic experiences, succeed in school. And we go about pursuing this mission in three ways. We like to call this our three-legged stool, our theory of change, because what happens if you have a stool with three legs and you remove one of the legs? That stool's going to tip over. And so we like to think of it as a three-legged stool because it implies the central importance of each one of the legs. So the first of those, and this is some of what Joe alluded to in his introduction, is that we work directly on behalf of students and families. And we do this in a couple of ways. First, we provide legal representation to students and families in the special education system, where there is an interface happening between the traumatic experiences that students may have had in their lives and the disabilities that qualify them for special education and related services through state and federal law, and where they're not making progress at school for some reason. And we try to use our legal advocacy to help schools have a clearer understanding of why the student is experiencing learning difficulties or behavioral challenges at school, and make better decisions about the way that the student's IEP can support them. In addition to that direct legal representation, we have also begun doing a lot of work, as Joe alluded to, working to raise students' voices in the policy arena. We've been partnering with after-school programs across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and working to mentor and build the leadership and advocacy capacity of young people so that they can tell decision makers at the local and also at the state level what they need in order to do well in school. We believe that their voices should play a central role in driving education policy reform. So that's the first leg of the stool. The second, as many of you know, is that we also partner directly with educators, those at the school and the district level who desire to create trauma-sensitive schools and reach out to us for help and support in doing that work. And the third leg, this is partly what we'll talk about tonight, is law and policy. So we attempt to channel everything we learn from the students and families that we work with, as well as from the educators with whom we partner, into solutions that we bring to policymakers so that they understand what laws, policies, funding streams need to be in place in order to support schools to create learning environments where all children can thrive. So that's a thumbnail about who TLPI is. I'm assuming that by virtue of your participation in LIFT's courses, many of you are familiar with our two publications, Helping Traumatized Children Learn, volumes 1 and 2, and our website, traumasensitivschools.org. But just in case you weren't, now you are, and you can find more information about our work and our approach to trauma-sensitive schools in these resources. And then I wanted to just take a minute and say, which Patricia already sort of spoke to, but I want to say a bit more about the really phenomenal partnership that TLPI has had with Lesley University over the years, going back to before there was a LIFTS program, when it was just the Center for Special Education. And in fact, the very first Trauma Sensitive Schools conference that I think may have happened like in the whole world happened at Lesley back in the late 90s, when TLPI's founder and director, Susan Cole, worked with the director of the Center for Special Education at the time, Mary Beth Curtis, to really launch the trauma-sensitive schools movement by bringing people together to talk about the impacts of trauma on students in school. So it's been a really long and wonderful partnership, and I'm just so happy to be here tonight. So probably if I had to summarize TLPI's work and our thinking in one sentence, which is hard to do because we like lots of words. We're all about understanding complexity. And so we tend to use a lot of words to describe the complexity of learning and of educating students. But if I had to boil it down, it would probably be the sentence on this slide. It's the simple idea that all students learn best in a safe and supportive environment. So if we care about reducing achievement gaps, if we care about providing students with opportunity, if we care about schools as engines of democracy and civic participation, then we ought to create safe and supportive environments for students, because that's how they're going to learn best. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that you can only learn in an environment that's safe and supportive. Probably many of us spent some time learning in environments where we would not characterize them as safe and supportive, and we learned something, but we can learn best when we're in an environment where we feel a sense of connection, belonging, community, and where we feel safe. I'm just telling you what you already know, but that's just to say a key idea for TLPI. And so our vision for schools, what we call our trauma-sensitive vision, is that schools will become places in which all students feel safe, welcomed, supported, and entitled to participate fully in all the school has to offer. It is a school, trauma-sensitive schools, are schools where addressing trauma's impacts on learning on a school-wide basis, including trauma from racism and other structural inequities, is at the center of the school's educational mission. So this is the vision that guides our work, and this is what we're trying to create in the world, is more schools that meet this vision. Now, if you've looked at our publications, particularly Helping Traumatized Children Learn Volume 2, you know that we try to operationalize this vision by focusing on what a trauma-sensitive school looks like and feels like. And we have a list of what we call 6 attributes of a trauma-sensitive school. And these attributes came from schools that had done really good work to create trauma-sensitive learning environments. And after observing a number of those schools over a number of years, we saw that they tended to have certain things in common. First, in these schools, leadership and staff share an understanding of trauma's impact on learning and the need for a whole school approach to address trauma's impact. These schools support all students to feel safe, not just physically and socially and emotionally, but also academically. Because if you don't feel safe enough to take risks in your learning, you won't probably advance as much in your learning. Also, these schools address students' needs in holistic ways, not just looking at their academics, but also their relationships with adults and peers, their self-regulation of emotion, attention, and behavior. Yes, their academic competence, and also their physical and emotional well-being. These schools explicitly connect students to the school community and provide multiple opportunities to practice their developing skills. These schools embrace teamwork, and staff in these schools share responsibility for all students in the building. And finally, the leadership and staff in these schools seem to be able to anticipate and adapt to the ever-changing needs of students. So I share this with you because it begs a question, which is, how do we get schools to be places that exhibit these attributes and that reach this vision that was on the prior slide? As advocates, this is the question that preoccupies us. How do we get more schools to do this? Well, what we've learned from observing the work in schools is that it takes a process. An inquiry-based action planning process can help integrate trauma sensitivity into a school's educational mission. So this really isn't rocket science, it's pretty common sense, but that by engaging in learning together as a whole staff within a school building, really focusing on building that sense of teamwork, getting people together and asking hard questions about common priorities that the staff within a school identify, not priorities or urgencies imposed from outside, imposed by policymakers or others, but by having a process where the school staff really focuses on what matters most to them and their students, and then engaging in a process of planning about how to solve challenges, reflecting on the work, and deciding what data we're going to look at to know whether we're making progress. And doing this in an iterative way, this is the way that you start to take the deep understanding that people are building about trauma sensitivity and start to weave it throughout everything that the school does every day. So this is how we've observed successful school culture transformation to happen in schools as they work to become trauma sensitive. But it begs another very important question, in some ways a harder question, which is, how do we change systems to create more trauma sensitive schools? If this is the kind of process that educators seem to be able to use very effectively to create wonderful, caring, supportive learning environments for the children in their schools, how can we use policies, laws, funding at the system level to support educators to do this building by building and district by district? And this is the question that is our motivating question, or our essential question, I suppose you could say, for tonight. So what I'd like to do is share with you the way some lawyers have tried to answer this question about system change. I want to share with you two federal court cases in which advocates are trying to use courts and litigation to prod, encourage, I suppose you could say support districts or schools that may not be trauma sensitive to become so. And then I want to hear your thoughts about the efficacy of using courts in this way and see what you think about courts as a strategy for system change. So first, we're going to travel to Arizona. What you're seeing a picture of is the Havasupai Reservation, which is on a parcel of land along the western corner of the Grand Canyon's south rim. And this reservation contains the small village that you see here of Supai, Arizona. Now, this village is only accessible by helicopter or an 8-mile hike or a mule ride down to the canyon floor. It's not accessible by car or by other forms of transportation. It's home to about 650 residents, including 70 students at the Havasupai Elementary School. All of these students qualify for free or reduced lunch, and the school is served by 3 teachers who teach students in grades K through 8. There's no high school in the village. If students are going to continue their education past 8th grade, they've got to leave the village to do so. Here's a picture of the Havasupai Elementary School, which is there on the floor of the Grand Canyon. In 2017, 12 Havasupai children and the Native American Disability Law Center sued the federal government, specifically the Bureau of Indian Education and other officials within the Department of the Interior, alleging that the BIE, the Bureau of Indian Education, who was responsible for providing education on Native American reservations in the United States, had failed to provide even a basic, minimally adequate general education to the students in the school. Also alleging that the school had not offered an adequate system of special education to the students who attend and have disabilities, and also were not providing necessary wellness and mental health supports to these students. Specifically, the plaintiffs were alleging violations of the Indian Education Act and also of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, a law which I'm guessing many of you are familiar with, especially if you teach in special education. The violations that were alleged included the following. 1, that students were only given academic instruction in math and English, not in other academic subjects. Also, that teachers would leave frequently in the middle of the year, leaving students without access to adequate staffing in the school. In 1 year, there were 5 new teachers who had circulated through the school in 1 year. And there's only a faculty of 3. Students were being taught in combined grades, and there was no training for educators about effective practices for combining larger age cohorts into single classes. The plaintiffs alleged inadequate textbooks, no library, no field trips or other enrichment or extracurricular activities. Many of the students alleged repeated exclusion from the classroom for behaviors, including being sent home from school early, being frequently suspended or placed on, quote, homebound instruction, sometimes for months, with no more than 1 hour or so per week of tutoring and no homework or remedial work sent based on what was going on back in the classroom. Many students were referred to the juvenile justice system for behaviors, and some were even sent to residential or boarding schools outside of the canyon and away from their family if they had more significant needs. Also significantly, the school was alleged to have discontinued any community or family engagement activities or events, even including things like plays, dances, sporting events, and had engaged in a pattern of retaliation when family members had shown up at school and tried to advocate for better conditions for their students. So these were the factual allegations contained in the plaintiff's complaint. Importantly, what was new and different about this case was that the plaintiffs alleged traumatic experience as one of the explanatory factors for why students were not succeeding and why these conditions that I just described were so profoundly disturbing, because they were causing additional trauma in the lives of these children. So who were these students that brought this suit? Well, the complaint said that all 12 of them had experienced, quote, multiple adverse childhood experiences which negatively affected their child development and impacted their ability to carry out basic life activities necessary to access education. The complaint described first community-based trauma that students had experienced, including, quote, long-term, repeated, ongoing, and overlapping stressors, including family experience with boarding schools, which has adversely impacted the Havasupai community and contributed to present-day adversity. The complaint went on to describe a legacy of chronic discrimination, which included forced relocations, loss of homes, families, and culture, and forcible assimilation that was designed to stamp out a child's tribal affiliations and cultural identity at an early age. In addition to that community-based trauma, many of the individual plaintiffs also had individual traumatic experiences, including sexual abuse, repeated use of physical restraints, traumatic classroom-based arrests and referral to the juvenile justice system, experiencing a lot of prone restraints at school, and also high incidence of bullying in the school, physical bullying. So just to summarize, what the complaint said is that given the rate of adverse childhood experiences impacting students in Havasupai, students require a public school with a system that is responsive to complex trauma and able to deliver specialized instruction, related services, and accommodations necessary for students whose ability to access the benefits of a public education is affected by exposure to adversity and complex trauma. So this is a unique legal theory. This is a legal theory that's saying because of the profound trauma that the students in this community have experienced, in combination with the dismal circumstances of this particular school, as alleged by the plaintiffs, there is a legal right of action, and that the federal government should be ordered to provide this system that is responsive to the complex traumatic needs of these students. So that's the theory. What did the plaintiffs ask for? What did they ask the court to do as a result of their allegations? Here's a quote from their request for relief. They wanted trained staff and services necessary to respond to complex trauma and students' social emotional needs, including but not limited to comprehensive and ongoing training, coaching, and consultation for all adult staff regarding trauma-informed and culturally sensitive strategies for engaging students and fostering a healthy, supporting environment. They also wanted implementation of restorative practices to prevent, address, and heal after conflict, employment of appropriately trained counselors who could assist with identification of students who have mental health difficulties, and finally, adoption of practices and interventions to enhance student wellness that are responsive to Havasupai beliefs and traditions and are created in partnership with community members. This is what they asked the court to order. What I would like to do is put a question to you all, which is based on the theory of what a trauma-sensitive school is and the vision that I laid out initially and the attributes of a trauma-sensitive school. What is your opinion or impression of the specific elements of relief that the plaintiffs asked for in this case? We're gonna have a little interactive activity here. How enthusiastic are you about the relief that was requested by the plaintiffs in this case? Do you think that these 4 things will add up to a trauma-sensitive school if implemented? Are there other things that you would have asked for that you didn't see listed? You can go to the link at the top of this slide on your browser, pollev.com/Michael Grego 179, and you will see a diagram that looks like this, and you can click on the face that best describes how enthusiastic you are about the relief sought by the plaintiffs in this case. And in a minute, I'll click a button here and we'll see what the group thinks, how enthusiastic the group is about this requested relief. Svetlana is saying, I don't see the link. Well, you don't see it because it's at the top. Let me type it in here. I'll just type it right in the, oh, somebody did, Patricia, thank you. You put it right in the chat. Now we'll see here in the bottom right-hand corner, the total results are going to start to go up.
I got it wrong. I'm going to retype.
Oh, thank you. When the results get up to, oh, I don't know, 20 or 30 or something, I'll click a button and we'll see where the group is. Up to 7. There it goes. Patricia put the link right in the chat. All right, now it's starting to go up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and show the responses. Oh, here it goes. We're over 20 now. People can still keep responding. So you can see all the little green pin points. So one person really was not enthusiastic. Most people were in the middle with a slightly positive orientation. Here's what I want to do. I want to just ask somebody who did, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'm over the second one from the light green, the light green semi-smiley face. Is there somebody who put your pin there who'd be willing to just say in a sentence or two why you selected that option?
I'll talk. That's Lisa Brockheisen.
Lisa, hello, Lisa. Thank you for jumping in.
It just stood out. I do work for an agency that we do some ongoing training. And in theory, I think it could work beautifully. There are some so if it was working the way it was written now, I was thinking when I heard the word ongoing, that it's not a one and done, and there's, in theory, if it's done well. So that's why I selected that.
Great, thank you for that response. What about somebody who chose the neutral face in the middle, the yellow face? Would somebody who selected that be willing to share your thinking?
I choose the middle face, but my explanation will be exactly the same. The theory is theory, and we should approve it. We should try it and to fix, to develop, and so on. So simply for me, this yellow face, it's like good. it's not bad. It's okay. It's okay. It just requires to further exploration.
Very good. Thank you.
And of course, experiments.
Yes. Now, I am so curious to ask if the person who selected the red face would be willing to speak up and say why, but that's really to put that person on the spot. So you certainly don't have to, but I bet we would all be curious to know what you were thinking. So I'll pause for a moment and see if you're feeling like raising your voice. Okay, well then we will all just use our imaginations and continue to be curious, and we'll move on. So what I want to tell you next is what they actually got. So we just talked about what they asked for. Let's find out what they got. And it usually takes a minute to sort of, there we go. What did plaintiffs get? Well, the court approved a settlement agreement in the case on October 2nd, 2020. And here's what the parties settled in agreement on. First, a permanent national policy that the Bureau of Indian Education will implement Section 504 in all of the schools that it operates. Now, you would think that that wouldn't even need to be said, that if there's already a federal law requiring all recipients of federal funds to not discriminate against students with disabilities, that would apply to schools that the federal government is in fact running and operating. But apparently, and I don't know a lot of the law in this area, but apparently there was no national policy. So that's a good thing. Not really the thing they asked for with respect to trauma sensitivity, but probably an important thing. In addition, there would be appointment of an independent monitor to review Havasupai Elementary School's compliance with Section 504 and oversee development and implementation of a compliance plan. Third, the individual plaintiffs in the case would receive compensatory education in the amount of $240,000 total, which would come out to be $20,000 per child. And they could go, and there were provisions about where they could purchase services to supplement what they were getting at school and to make up for the deprivation of past services. And of course, attorney's fees in the sum of $725,000. This is what they got in the settlement. Now, it's important to point out that there were multiple claims in the lawsuit, and this settlement was only about 2 of the claims. It was the claims related to Section 504 and the plaintiff's need for an education that could address their complex trauma. The remaining claims, the judge actually denied, and the parties are appealing those claims arising under the Indian Education Act to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So, how enthusiastic are you about the settlement? Go to the same link and complete the poll again. Now, some reason on this one, it's not popping up with the responses or the results as they go. So I'm just going to open the responses and we'll see it in real time. Yes, a very different distribution of pins, including somebody who was like, I'm not even going on the red face. I'm going to the left of the red face. I'm really disappointed in this outcome. I can understand that impulse. So quickly, and then I want to make sure we leave time for discussion. So I'm going to get on to the second case next. But quickly, I'm curious to hear maybe somebody, well, let's just go for the red face. Somebody in the large group of pins on the red face. Why did you react negatively to this settlement? Maybe to state the obvious, but that's fine.
I'll discuss it. Well, I picked it because I think it was just a way of just throwing money at them and not actually fixing the problem. Right, their attorney fees, like, oh, here's some money to fix your problem a little bit. It didn't address, like you said, the trauma sensitive aspect of it, and it kind of didn't really fix anything. It just made sure that laws that, as you mentioned, should have been already implemented were implemented. Nothing new came about, nothing actually concrete fixed the problem.
Yeah, thank you, Shayla. I probably share your view. And let me just say, I guess, how I interpret what went on. That although the lawyers were alleging this novel theory about trauma, when it came to the end of the day, and they were offered a deal where they could get this nationwide policy to hopefully improve the education of Native Americans in schools run by the federal government, that was the more important thing to them. And actually doing what would remedy the trauma kind of fell by the wayside in exchange for getting this national policy, which, is a good policy. But what you see is that in the give and take of negotiation and litigation, it was easy to lay aside the things that some of you liked about the requested relief that would have actually made a difference with respect to trauma. Okay, let's move on to the next case. We're gonna stay in the Southwest, but move on to a different state. We're gonna move to Compton, California, which is pictured here, both in a photo and on a map. Compton, as you probably know, is a city in southern Los Angeles County. It is a city that is served by the Compton Unified School District, which provides public education K through 12. The district serves about 26,000 students and operates 24 elementary schools, 8 middle schools, 3 high schools, 1 adult school, and 5 alternative learning schools. The school population is 79% Latinx and 19% African American. In 2015, student plaintiffs who attend schools in Compton filed a lawsuit against the Compton Unified School District. This is called Peter P. versus Compton Unified School District. This is a picture of Centennial High School, one of the 3 high schools in the district. And they allege that they have been denied meaningful access to public education as a result of the school district's practices and policies that failed to accommodate the effects of complex trauma. Even worse, their complaint said these policies and practices perpetuate and sometimes create trauma on their own. They also sued, like the plaintiffs in the Havasupai case, under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, but also under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Unlike that case in Arizona, where it was just the 12 students who were named as plaintiffs that were bringing the case, the named plaintiffs in Peter P. Asserted that they were part of a class. They brought a class action complaint. And they said that they represent a class consisting of all current and future students enrolled in Compton who have experienced or will experience complex trauma and who have not received reasonable accommodations that would enable them to receive the benefits of this district's educational programs. They alleged that student plaintiffs attending schools in this district have experienced and continue to experience traumatic events that profoundly affect their psychological, emotional, and physical well-being. The complaint said that although even a single traumatic experience can impair a child's ability to learn, student plaintiffs and class members are subjected to multiple, repeated, and sustained traumatic experiences. These experiences suffered by plaintiffs and their peers include, but are not limited to, witnessing or experiencing violence, grief over the loss of family members and friends, the loss of a caregiver due to deportation, incarceration, or family separation, the causes and consequences of involvement in the foster system, extreme socioeconomic hardship and its attendant consequences, including homelessness, as well as discrimination and racism. The complaint said that although trauma is widespread and affects children in all communities, complex trauma is particularly ubiquitous among Compton school children, like student plaintiffs. Violence, poverty, and discrimination are so pervasive that in any Compton classroom, the only reasonable expectation is that a significant number of students are likely suffering from complex trauma. And the plaintiff's complaint even included this picture, which compared the sites of homicides in the community within the prior 12 months and the location of schools within the district. So as a visual representation, I don't often read legal complaints to courts that have pictures in them, but this one actually included a picture of these maps to impress upon the court the level of trauma in this community. So what were these plaintiffs seeking? They were seeking trauma-sensitive policies and procedures that will allow student class members an opportunity to receive an adequate public education. And this included 3 of the same things that they asked for in the Havasupai case. So I'm not going to show you the smiley faces again because you basically already evaluated the relief that was sought. They sought the very same things that were sought in the Arizona case. But what did these plaintiffs get? Well, they worked collaboratively with the school district and launched something called the Wellness Initiative, a multi-pronged program designed to address the academic, social, emotional, attendance, and behavioral needs of students. And here are the components of that wellness program: PBIS and restorative practices, character education through an anti-bullying and kindness initiative, school-based wellness centers that provide mental health and counseling services, trauma-informed training and support for all educators, which also includes a yearly book study. Wonder what book they're going to read. And 5, teaching students skills to cope with their anxiety and emotions through SEL programs. Okay, last one. What do you think about this settlement? You think this was a good outcome for the Peter P. case? Once again, I won't wait. In the interest of time, we'll just go right to the responses and see. Feel free to enter even as you see others already having done so. So largely positive. Let's go with somebody who's all the way on the green side, who has the big smile. Why did you choose that face? Why are you enthusiastic about this settlement? Oh, someone can share. You were so enthusiastic you chose the green face. Why?
I was enthusiastic about the settlement just because it provided a wide range of supports, and it took into account, sorry, my toddler, it took
All
into
right.
their requests and considered what they were actually asking for. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate the comment. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to take more comments now because we'll have a chance to share them in just in a general discussion, but a few points to draw or lessons perhaps to draw from these court cases, or I suppose more than lessons, maybe more like questions. The first question that arises for me from these cases that I think about when I evaluate their effectiveness is, what is the relationship between trauma and disability? So the legal hook that both of these cases had to use to get these settlement agreements and this relief was they had to allege that there was a connection between trauma and disability. And as I was reading about these, I read an article in the Santa Fe, New Mexican, just a newspaper article that had a quote in it, which I share here, that really stood out to me. So the journalist says, reports that government attorney Cesar Lopez Morales said at a hearing last year that while trauma could result in a disability, federal agencies cannot assume every Native student with shared experiences is disabled. They would need specifics of individuals' impairments and how those affect their lives. And this came up in the Compton case as well. The judge in that case denied the class action that the plaintiffs wanted to bring because the judge said, you're making assumptions that just because students attend Compton schools and live in these communities that they're traumatized and that they're disabled. And I think we need to think carefully about applying the disability label to students simply because they've had a certain experience or grown up in a certain community or have attended a certain school. So this gives me pause when I think about litigation like this. And if to make it successful, we have to allege disability, I just think we ought to think carefully about applying that label. I think the cases also raise an important question about the relationship between trauma and racism. Certainly race and racism was an element of both cases and was alleged by both sets of plaintiffs in a way that I think helpfully gives voice to the violence and trauma that members of communities of color can often experience. Here's an actual quote from the Peter P. case on this point. They said, racial oppression itself is a traumatic form of interpersonal violence, which can lacerate the spirit, scar the soul, and puncture the psyche. chronic exposure to acts of racism can lead to internalized devaluation, an assaulted sense of self, internalized voicelessness, and rage. I think this is an important thing to express. I also am a little troubled by the fact that it's white attorneys who are speaking this on behalf of communities of color, where the communities themselves have not necessarily embraced this notion. And particularly when we're describing these communities with words like rage, I just think we have to be very careful about the framing of the connection between trauma and racism, and particularly who's speaking about that connection. So these cases raise questions for me about that. And third, they raise questions for me about whether trauma sensitivity can really grow from a mandate. So that's what litigation is. It's getting a judge to order a school or a district to do something that it's not already doing. And when we at TLPI think about the way we've seen schools transform their culture to become trauma sensitive, it hasn't been because of a mandate, because of somebody coming in and telling a group of educators what they must do. Rather, this is our hypothesis, or the hypothesis that explains what we've observed. What makes trauma sensitivity is a deepening understanding of the impact of trauma on learning and implementation of an inquiry-based action planning process designed to address local priorities. And that this is what leads to shifts in thinking and shifts in practice that can become embedded in school operations and part of the way the school is run. It's about a deepening understanding and a coming together of a staff and an urgency around a set of problems or priorities that staff has. That's what gets people to change their hearts and minds. Not necessarily because policymakers or a judge comes in and tells you you should do things a different way. Now, that said, I certainly think that, there were profound inequities going on in the Havasupai Elementary School, and apparently, if we believe the allegations in the plaintiff's complaint, throughout the Compton Unified School District. So clearly there was a sense of urgency among advocates and some community members to fix those problems. I just wonder whether changing the hearts and minds of the educators and the leaders in those buildings could come from being ordered to do so by somebody outside the school, like a court. So, so I'm going to leave you with those questions, and I'm going to circle back to the question that I asked at the beginning. And I'm going to skip over some slides here because I planned too much. We don't have time to go through everything. See all slides. We're going to come here to the end. So how do we change systems to create more trauma sensitive schools? I'm curious to know, after hearing about these cases and the things they asked for and then the relief that they got, and also the questions that I guess I'm raising, what's on your minds in the minutes that we have left about the usefulness of going to court and filing a lawsuit to get trauma sensitivity? Does this seem like a good strategy to you, or do you have questions about it?
I don't mind sharing. There's something for me that feels like this is an important step. Like, is it a good step? I don't know, but it feels like an important step, because if people don't know, they don't know what they don't know. And having some sort of legal court case is a way of letting a larger group of people understand what's actually really happening for the people inside a building. The other piece that I would say, no, we can't make people find that this kind of training is important, but we cannot assume either that that they won't find it important. And again, like, exposure to something that you didn't know is a place to start. And making an assumption that people wouldn't get something positive or important out of it, or even be impacted to want to really dive into something they had no idea and now feel very strongly about. We need to put that into place too. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. Is it Alana?
Yes.
Yes.
And we have a question from Heidi Brooks has a raised hand. And there's been a comment made on Michael, a comment about the the power of court action to actually contribute to devaluation of participants. And I think it was Connie, I don't know if you feel like speaking to that comment, please go right ahead.
I'm sorry, the dog was barking. Can you just ask me, are you talking about what I said in the chat?
Yes, if you'd like to just bring out that comment, and maybe Mike could react to it a little bit.
Sure. Mike, you were talking about being careful with the word disability and you know, how you were discussing that excerpt from the court case and certain words like racism and the way that people are feeling. And I think the word devaluation was a horrible word to use because like you said, these people are then thinking of, wow, they're thinking that we're devalued. We think that we're devalued or we are devalued. So it's really, really putting more of a stigma on those populations. I just think it was a horrible word for the court to use.
Thank you, Connie. I guess I don't have much to say about it, Sal. I think Connie said it well. Heidi, I'll let you direct traffic, Sal. I'll just be quiet.
Okay. Heidi Brooks also had a question, and I'll call upon her to maybe ask it.
Hi, not so much as a question as just thinking about other things that we do in education. And I really think about the parallel of how we have to respond to English language learners. And in Massachusetts, that came about with, you know, sort of a mandate, which came from, you know, a vote across the state. And I don't really know that people knew what they were voting for. But when I think about what we have to do for ELL, I think similarly, we need to do that. The trauma sensitivity really applies to all students. And some of what they gave Compton, what we're doing in schools with PBIS can do that. But I wish that there was some sort of mandate that got more counselors into schools. And I was really hoping that school departments would look at this, the ARA funding from COVID, and think about trauma sensitivity that students may have been faced with when they were home with families and in family situations, and had they lost family members through COVID. I really thought this was going to be our the raising of our flag for trauma sensitivity.
I think maybe in some places it is, but certainly not everywhere in the observations that I've made so far.
If we have time for a couple more, Cynthia Matos and then Leslie Reed. And that may be all we have time for.
Shall I just read Cynthia's out loud, or her comment in the chat was, I think advocacy needs to continue, and especially within the court systems, because it brings awareness, sheds light to the issues, and also leaves a paper track record of advocacy. It may be small change, but all small changes lead to big changes. I think this is a theme that I'm seeing in some of not only in Alana's comment that you spoke, but also in some of the written comments in the chat. I think this is really right. I think that undeniably what both of these cases did, particularly the Compton case, was to bring, to shed a light on the issue of trauma sensitivity and get a conversation happening that wasn't happening before. And so I think litigation can do that, particularly large federal court class action litigation. And so I think there's definitely that potential value. And I would agree with everybody who said that.
Michael, may I just make one comment?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So between the two cases, and you pointed it out, how the plaintiffs in each case had looked for the same, what is the word? They wanted the same thing.
Relief, the same. they asked
Relief,
for the
thank
same
you.
things.
Thank
Yes.
you, relief. And it's funny, I couldn't think of that word. I was a paralegal for 17 years before I started my master's of social work. So, but anyway, so it's funny how both cases are asking for the same relief, but the Compton case, they got so much more than the Havasupai. And to me, it just shows that there's that stigma, that bias, that racism, even within the court system itself. And I couldn't help recognizing that when you showed the relief, when you had it listed in your slides, it was right there in front of my face.
I think to me, Connie, in addition to sort of the issues that you point to, I also see the different outcomes in the cases as speaking in some ways to the unpredictability of litigation. And that, a lot depends on what judge you get, who the party is, and how willing they are to negotiate. The sense that I get from reading about the Compton settlement was that, of course, no school district wants to be sued, but that there was some, willingness and interest in working with the plaintiffs to design this wellness initiative. And so they were a willing negotiator in a way that it seems that the federal government may not have been in the Havasupai case. And so I think that speaks to the, just the inherent unpredictableness of it as a remedy.
Yes, thank you.
This is Leslie. I didn't have a question. Mine was more of a comment. I'm a little uncomfortable with the having to legislate what should be a humane response to trauma. But I do think that it holds counties, cities, school districts accountable in a way that in such a litigious society, that accountability is necessary. And so I'm kind of on the fence, but I think it's a good plan B. It's a good buffer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a really important point. And I mean, I think you raised the question that I have. I mean, I raised questions that I have about the litigation. I also have questions about approaches like what we tend to do at TLPI, which is more, legislation, policy change, supporting stuff from the bottom up. And the question that I ask myself about our work is, are we getting there fast enough? Are we creating equity and accountability? What about the districts that don't want to do it? What about the educators who don't come to courses at lifts because they want to, improve their practice and improve their schools and do better for kids? How do we get to those schools? And I think that's, there's trade-offs on both sides. And those are the questions that I would direct at us or that I carry around when we're not doing litigation. So thank you for raising that. And maybe the answer is that it's not like one right approach or another. Maybe we need lots of our approaches. We need some litigation happening. We need some legislation. We need some bottom up. We need more, more courses like the ones you all are taking. Maybe we just need more of everything. I want to, since we're a few minutes past 6, not that I mind staying, but and continuing the discussion, but for those of you that have other things to do on your Friday evening, I guess I just wanted to end with sort of 2 thoughts. One of them is the one that I just said. Whoops. Sorry, I'm messing up here. The thought about equity, which is what Leslie, I think you said accountability, but I see it as also having equity concerns. And that's a word that I was bringing to it. A thought to leave everybody with is just, if we didn't use litigation approaches or mandates, then how do we make sure everybody does it? And how do we make sure that every child has access to this kind of learning environment? And then the other final parting thought that I had was just some reflections about your role, at least those of you who are educators and who are working in schools. And, I was, thinking about these cases and thinking about the work that TLPI does and our advocacy. And it just really occurred to me that even simply just by being here tonight and by engaging in this wonderful learning community that LIFTS has put together, you are engaging in advocacy. If the linchpin for this whether it comes from litigation, which included orders for training, or whether it comes from voluntary approaches. If the crux is about deepening educators' understanding and then taking that understanding back to your schools, back to your classrooms, back to your colleagues, back to your communities, then this is advocacy. Being here and doing this and learning what you're learning is an act of advocacy. And so I want you to see that about your work and about being here. I also think that this implies a great responsibility, not only on you to actually take the learning back and do something with it, but also on those of us who see ourselves as advocates to make sure that, again, whether it be through litigation or through other approaches, we're making sure you have the supports that you need to do right by students and to share this learning with your colleagues. So I guess that's the thought that I would leave on, is to see this work that you're going to do as part of LIFS as an act of advocacy, and that we at TLPI are certainly in solidarity with you as you do that. So thank you.
Michael, on behalf of LIFS, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for this really important discussion. You've introduced us to important questions on the impact of the role of the courts in education, and really some eye-opening questions for us to keep on our front burners. So thank you so much. It was an amazing comments. Please take a look at the comments in the chat about amazing, informative, and thought-provoking presentation that you've given us tonight. We're very grateful for that.
Thank
Very
you.
grateful for
Appreciate
that.
the invitation. Thank you very much. And I saw somebody asked about the slides. Yes, I will send them along and happy to share them.
And we'll make them available. Thank you so much.
All right.
Patricia, closing remarks?
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Let's all be acts of advocates and demand or strive for equity. This was very inspiring. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you all.
Okay to pause the recording?